My name is Coley. I'm 30 years old, born and bred in Jersey. I'm a published poet. I have my own podcast, and I'm mentally ill on top of dealing with grief. About almost 2 years ago, my grandmother went into the hospital. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. My grandmother went into the hospital for a bed sore. And she came out on hospice. And she was very much unconscious while she was at home waiting to die. So we were giving her Ativan and morphine round the clock to keep her calm and to keep her out of pain. And then I remember May 28th, I had a moment alone with her where everyone was downstairs and I was with her by myself in the living room where the hospital bed was. And I told her, "It's okay. You can go. I'll be okay." And early the next morning, there was a knock on my door, and it was my aunt. And she told me that she was gone. And I came out of my room and walked into the living room. And I held her hand, and it was cold. One of the most not vibrant, one of the most vivid memories that I have of that time, of that day, was when the funeral directors came to pick up her body, and they put her in a body bag. It's been almost 2 years, May 29th of 2021. And there are still times when it hurts to breathe because the grief is so crushing.
Yeah.
After her funeral, I went down to visit a few friends to kind of clear my head and not be overwhelmed with the grief.
Yeah.
As much as I could be. And while I was there, I got an email from my job telling me that I'd been fired.
Ooh.
I don't know really why I was fired, but I was fired nonetheless. And this was less than 2 weeks after my grandmother died.
Oof.
And my job was my identity for a long time. I have borderline personality disorder, so I struggle with my identity. I struggle with depth of emotion. So after that, I just felt completely lost.
Yeah.
And I had a virtual meeting with my psychiatrist. And I told her everything that was going on. And she's like, "Do you think you might need that partial hospitalization program again?" because I'd already been in the partial hospitalization program twice. And I said, I think that might be a good idea. Yeah. My grandmother was my best friend. She was always the one who was proud of me. And I very rarely hear that someone's proud of me now. So I was very distraught and agreed to go into the program. For those who may not know what a partial hospitalization program is like.
I was going to say, maybe that's one moment I'm going to pause you there, just because it's not, and it's a great thing that I don't know if that many people hear that phrase that like, you know, of what that is. Yeah, you know, sorry, go ahead.
So I would go to the local behavioral health center, which also happens to be a hospital, a psychiatric unit, for inpatient programs. But a partial hospitalization program is an outpatient program.
Yeah.
And I was going from 9 to 3, Monday to Friday. And it's just therapy, group therapy, group activities, medication management, all of that, just to make sure that, you know, you're stable.
Yeah.
It's a minimum of 4 weeks. I think this time I was in it for 6 weeks, which is, I think, the shortest amount of time I had been in a partial hospitalization program. I knew I was getting better, or at least developing around my grief better.
Yeah.
When I heard my grandmother's primary care doctor paged over the intercom for the hospital, and I didn't burst out into tears. I acknowledged the fact that it was triggering, but I didn't burst out into tears.
Yeah.
Grief plays a funny role in my life. The first person I lost was my great uncle when I was like 7, and I've just consistently lost people throughout my life, including my mom almost 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I'm no stranger to grief. But this time I actually am working through it in a healthy way, as opposed to getting medicated for it or just stuffing it down.
Yeah.
Because, again, with bipolar disorder, not bipolar, well, I have that too. I meant to say borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
I had a therapist once describe emotions with BPD as tsunamis. They're very overwhelming. And what may seem like something small to someone else is very big to someone with borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
This is my first real time processing grief since being diagnosed with BPD. And this is the first time that this is the first time that I'm dealing with the grief in a healthy way, like I said before, but also in a way that didn't have me focusing on anger.
Yeah. Do you see yourself with, like, so here you are later on, and after you've had, 2 losses, now that you have this information, this knowledge, we often talk about, like, healing isn't linear at all. And especially when it comes to, the grief of something, a loss of relationship, a loss of a loved one. Do you find yourself kind of looping backwards to those moments that that you didn't have the knowledge, have the tools, have the understanding of how to properly grieve, going back to those moments, or no?
Not really.
No.
My main focus is grieving my mother and grieving my grandmother. Like I said, I've lost other people steadily over my life. But I don't really go back to those because I think in my own way I did grieve them. But the loss of my mother is still there, and the loss of my grandmother is still very fresh.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about the time periods. I mean, that's the right word to use, in my opinion, is fresh. That 10 and 2 to me is the exact amount of time, and the realities of processing, the loss of someone so important, so special, so impactful in our lives. It's still early on,
Yeah. My grandmother helped me through so much in my life. She was always there for me. She was the constant, she was the one constant in my life.
Yeah.
My upbringing wasn't very happy, except for the moments that I had with her.
Yeah.
So losing her felt like losing a lot of those moments that were still to come.
Yeah.
And it felt like losing a lot of those moments that were in the past. And I know that we have those memories and we hold on to those memories, but they're not as fresh in my mind.
Yeah. And at the same time, you think that while you understand that people don't live forever, like, somewhere in your mind, you feel like you still have the chance to make new ones, along the way, like, while those are still there, and you can refer back to them, you're just like, you don't really think that it's a big deal that they're there in the past at the moment. It's like there's other ones coming until they're not.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
And it was hard because, like I'd said, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and her disease progressed quickly.
Fast.
There were times towards the end where she didn't recognize who I was, which is normal in Alzheimer's, but
Sure.
It hurts nonetheless.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I walked into her hospital room, that last time she was in the hospital, and she had no clue who I was. And I remember walking out crying.
Yeah.
And then the next time I went to go see her, she was conscious but unresponsive. She was struggling to breathe. I had gone out to the nurse's station and said, my grandmother's having trouble breathing. Can you do something? And they sent in a respiratory therapist. And they said, I don't really, she's DNI and DNR. There's nothing really that we can do. But up until that point, I didn't know she was DNR. So I'd called my aunt on my way out and told her, and she's like, she's not DNR. What are they talking about? And so she called and raised, holy hell. After she called my grandfather, and he originally said, no, she's not DNR. And later that night, she called again. He's like, yeah, no, we decided when she went in that she wanted to be DNR. And it was difficult hearing that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was understandable.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was going to say, it feels like they made that decision and were comfortable with, this being the end of their story. Mm-hmm. And you're still on the other end of it, not ready to necessarily, while you may know that that's coming, you're not ready to have it be the end. And then to hear that, I can imagine is like, oh, hold on. Like,
yeah,
I didn't know you were ready, or I'm not ready. How are you? It's kind of throws the ball of confusion in the air. Absolutely. I can definitely understand that might be the case.
Yeah. But, part of me was slightly relieved when she went.
Sure. There's that too.
Just
absolutely.
Because Alzheimer's is such a torturous disease for the person afflicted.
Yeah.
It runs rampant on my mother's side of the family. My great aunts had it. My grandma had it. There's no telling whether or not my mom would have gotten it. Because both of her parents had Alzheimer's. So it's very likely she would have had it.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. It's so hard to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely presents a whole new challenge in your own mind too, right? That you watch that to somebody and know the generations prior have had that, and that's that's a whole different ball game compared to having somebody say that there's heart disease in our family, or something truly physical that you can see on the inside of somebody's body part, organs breaking down, like having somebody tell you there's a history of Alzheimer's in your family, I think for me would be even scarier,
Yeah.
and then to watch somebody that you love and is so important in your life, lose a battle to that just makes that, another challenge, another weight on your shoulder.
Yeah.
How do you, so having a diagnosis, such as you have, and then having these huge weights of grief, how do you feel you've processed it? Because grief by itself, with a quote normal person that can see those emotions, have those emotions. In fact, even just today, just hearing one person's story, just telling me that like they knew they were in the journey of grief at this moment when they came home from the funeral, and here they go. And while still sad and still fresh in their mind, it felt like okay, like I'm on it and that's it. Whereas in your case, just even seeing the emotion of that is the challenge, let alone having the weight of the loss on that. How do you feel about how you're processing it?
It's definitely
without a doctor telling you like, hey, you're doing great, or having somebody like of authority or of expertise tell you. How do you feel about the path that you're on as far as these fresh feelings of grief?
It's definitely difficult.
Yeah.
I can't say it's more or less difficult than anyone else because I don't have anyone else's experience. Sure. But I know grief is already so complicated. And then you add in something like borderline personality disorder, and it just adds another layer of complexity to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still in therapy. I am wonderful some days, and then other days I'm just a sobbing mess on my therapy call with my therapist. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to, healing isn't linear.
Yeah.
But it's so incredibly frustrating. And I saw an infographic about grief shortly after my grandmother died. And it was a ball inside of like a mason jar. And it was a big ball. And the first part of it showed the mason jar getting bigger and bigger to accommodate, showed the ball getting smaller and smaller inside the mason jar. And the second part of it showed the mason jar getting bigger and bigger to accommodate the grief.
Yeah.
Because the size of grief never really shrinks.
Yeah.
It's always there, and it's always pressing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect analogy, right? I mean, and you can hear that as many times as you want to, over and over again, before you feel the loss of somebody, and it still blindsides you. It still, doesn't make sense, and you're still trying to figure out 10 years later, how to go through it. I just looking at my mother, and then my wife having to deal with somebody close, like their mother, their father, two very strong women and two very independent women, but it doesn't matter how long it's going to be. I mean, it's been 20 years for my mom, it's been 10 years for my wife. The day comes around that it's their birthday, or the day of their passing, it's like it happened yesterday, to some degree. I mean, there's not this, amount of tears or anything like that, but it's the same solemn phrases, and it just shows you, you know, you have control over it, but you don't, you know, and you know, you're okay with that after a while, you know, you just understand that that's how important they were to you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I this past year on my grandmother's birthday, I was actually on a camping retreat, and I remember getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark out, and just crying by myself in my cabin, silently, so I didn't wake up my bunkmates.
Yeah.
And then I got up and had a pretty awesome day.
Yeah.
But there was that overhang of it's her birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, to see that and to be able to say those things simultaneously, you know, or feel those things simultaneously, I think we forget that that's a beautiful thing, really. You know, that you have two completely opposite emotions that get to exist and have, you know, the outcome of the day is exactly, you know, the same, you know, that it was that. Where would you say along the way here, what has been the best advice you've received to kind of process all of this?
To let the emotions come and to feel them instead of shoving everything down so you don't feel them, so you don't have to deal with them, because not dealing with them is only prolonging the grief. It's not stopping you from feeling it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it.